Hello, everyone. I'm Mandy Slowinski, Director for Student Financial Support Services at Madison College, and I'm here to welcome you to Video 4 of WASFA's From FAFSA to Financial Aid Offer, a Counselor's Roadmap series. If you are joining us from another video in the series, welcome back. And if this is your first one, we're glad you're here. If you've ever had a student ask, my parents are divorced, now what? Or my mom won't fill out the FAFSA, then you're in exactly the right session. Today, we're going to talk about one of the FAFSA topics that generates the most questions and sometimes the biggest headaches for students, families, counselors, and honestly, financial aid professionals too. We'll walk through dependency status, who counts as a parent on the FAFSA, and some of the family situations that can make completing the FAFSA a little more complicated. Our goal is to help you feel more confident answering questions, recognizing when something is straightforward, and knowing when it's time to connect a student with the financial aid office or for additional guidance. And remember, this is just one video in our Counselor Roadmap series. If you haven't already, be sure to check out the other videos available on the WASFA YouTube channel. They're designed to walk counselors through the financial aid process from start to finish. All right, let's get started. Here's a quick look at what we'll cover today. First, we'll explain what a contributor is, a term introduced with the redesign of FAFSA that sometimes causes confusion. Next, we'll review the difference between dependent and independent students and the questions used to determine dependency status. And then finally, we'll introduce situations where parents aren't involved, how divorce and separated parents are handled, and wrap up with a few other family situations that often raise questions, including mixed status families and parents who aren't working or filing taxes. By the end of today's session, you'll have a better understanding of these common situations and, just as importantly, know when it's best to encourage a student to contact the financial aid office for individualized guidance. Before we jump into the content, I'll tell you just a little bit about myself. I worked in financial aid for over 20 years in a variety of roles, from counseling students to processing aid, compliance, and other leadership roles. And I serve as the Director for Student Financial Support Services at Madison College currently. So one thing that I feel like hasn't changed over, the last 2 decades is that dependency questions are still some of the most common and sometimes the most emotional conversations we have with our students and families. Every family situation is different, and that's what makes this topic so important. No two students walk through the doors exactly the same way. And that's really one of the reasons I love working in financial aid. So I'm excited to be presenting with my co-presenter, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Katie Weisenberger. I've also worked in financial aid for over 20 years, and in a variety of capacities: financial aid auditor, financial aid director, financial aid administrator. And I've also worked a lot with students who have dependency questions. Like Mandy said, this is one thing that hasn't changed throughout my career. And, exactly what she said, like can be some of the most emotional conversations that you have. And each student situation and family situation is different. I currently work at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I serve as the Assistant Director of Compliance Advocacy and Training. And I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you, Katie. So as you heard, between the two of us, we've worked with students from both technical college and large public universities. So while our institutions might look different, the FAFSA rules are the same, and the questions we receive from students and counselors are remarkably similar. So let's jump into the content. So who's the contributor? Well, one of the biggest, terminology changes with the redesign of FAFSA was the introduction of the word contributor. A contributor is, simply someone who is required to provide information on the student's FAFSA. So depending on the student's circumstances, that could include the student, one or both parents, or a spouse. One thing I always like to emphasize, because it comes up quite often, is that being a contributor does not make someone financially responsible for paying for college. Sometimes families hear the word contributor and immediately think, wait, does this mean I'm agreeing to pay that tuition bill? That's not what it means. Providing information simply allows the Department of Education to determine the student's eligibility for financial aid. So, in other words, contributors are sharing information, not signing up to pay the tuition bill. For dependent students, the required parent is generally a biological or adopted parent. If that parent is remarried, the step parent's information is also included. So helping families identify the correct contributors before they begin the FAFSA can really prevent delays and make the process much smoother. Now let's look at how the FAFSA determines whether a student is dependent or independent. So the FAFSA asks a series of questions, and if a student answers yes to any of these questions, they're considered independent for federal financial aid purposes and generally won't need to provide parent information. Some of the more common situations include being the age of 24, being married, serving on active duty, being a veteran, supporting children of your own, or enrolling in a graduate or professional program. So while the FAFSA simplification introduced several changes to the application process, including the concept of contributors, these dependency questions themselves have remained largely the same. One of the best pieces of advice we can give students is to slow down and read each question carefully. These questions are answered exactly as they are written, and sometimes students answer based on what they think the question is asking rather than what it actually says. So, for example, we often hear students say, I live on my own, or my parents don't claim me on their taxes. Those situations may absolutely be true, but they don't always determine dependency for federal financial aid. Only these federal dependency questions do. So if a student doesn't meet one of these dependency criteria, but has circumstances that make obtaining parent information impossible or unsafe, don't assume that they're out of options. Encourage students to complete as much of the FAFSA as they can and contact their financial aid office. We'll talk more about these situations in just a moment. The remaining dependency questions focus on students who have experienced significant circumstances. So these include students that have been in foster care or wards of the court, are legally emancipated, are in legal guardianship, or have experienced homelessness or are at risk of homelessness. So these questions recognize that some students may not have the same family support or access to parent information as other students. So one of the biggest misconceptions too we continue to hear is that students assume they're automatically considered independent because they live on their own, support themselves financially, or their parents are no longer paying them on their taxes. So while those situations again are true, they themselves don't make that student independent for federal financial aid purposes. As counselors, you don't need to have every answer for every unique family situation. One of the most valuable things that you can do is recognize when a student's circumstances may require additional review and encourage them to reach out to their financial aid office. And those are exactly the kinds of conversations we want students to have with their financial aid office. So we've covered how the FAFSA determines dependency status and who is required to provide information. But as you all know, life doesn't always fit as neatly into a series of yes or no questions. Fortunately, the FAFSA recognizes that some situations require additional review. And Katie is going to take it from here and walk us through what happens when parents aren't involved, along with several other family situations counselors commonly encounter.
Thanks, Mandy. So let's talk a little bit about when parents aren't involved. So let's say a parent refuses to provide information, consent, or support on the FAFSA, but the student's already been determined to be dependent on the FAFSA. Parent information is required to be eligible for most types of financial aid, but there are certain circumstances where a student can still receive financial aid. First, let's talk about if a student submits a FAFSA without parent information. In that case, the FAFSA will be processed for unsubsidized loans only. And then in limited situations, extenuating circumstances, financial aid offices are allowed to override a student's dependency status based on those unusual circumstances. They can include abusive family environments, parent incarceration, estrangement, abandonment, inability to locate the parent, human trafficking, refugee or asylum status. And this is not an exhaustive list. There could be other circumstances that fit into these unusual circumstances, but in all of those cases, documentation is required. Whether the student submits a FAFSA without their parent or they are under one of these unusual circumstances, the best piece of advice is to contact the financial aid office, as Mandy mentioned multiple times. That's the best thing for students to do. The financial aid office can help provide the best information and options based on that student's specific situation. And then as a reminder, we just went over all the dependency questions. Just because a parent simply chooses not to help, it doesn't automatically make the student independent. And like Mandy said, that is one of the questions that any financial aid office gets a lot of the times. The students say, I'm living on my own, my parent doesn't support me. That doesn't necessarily make you independent for federal financial aid purposes. Okay, let's talk next about divorced and separated parents. In the case of these situations, a lot of times students ask which parent should be with the reporting parent on the FAFSA. And with FAFSA simplification, with the changes in federal financial aid, they have changed it. It's no longer based on the student's living arrangement. It's based on the parent who's providing the greater financial support to the student. Custody and divorce decrees don't supersede federal regulations. So it's always the parent who is providing the greater financial support to the student. And that's the parent who should be the reporting parent on the FAFSA. Now, let's say the reporting parent is remarried. In that case, the step parent's information must also be included. This is a question that we also get very regularly. And while the step parent may not offer direct support to the student, in theory, the biological or adoptive parent shares expenses, so they should be able to provide additional support to their student than if they were single. And then in the case of separated parents, financial aid offices look at legal separation, or they look at maintaining two separate households with different addresses. So if you have parents who are separated, but they're still living together, we would want both of those parents to report it on the FAFSA. Okay, and now we're going to talk a little bit about mixed status families. So only the student is required to be a US citizen or eligible non-citizen in order to be eligible for financial aid. So students can still submit the FAFSA regardless of their parent status. So as an example, you might have a student who is a US citizen and their parent or parents are undocumented. That student can still submit the FAFSA regardless of the parent status. And a student's eligibility for financial aid is not impacted based on the parent's status. Something that's changed over the last couple of years is contributors without a Social Security number can now create an FSA ID, or sometimes called a studentaid.gov account, for easy completion. I know when this first came out, things were a little rough for some of those contributors, and they have improved the process, and we've seen a lot of improvements on that process of contributors without a Social Security number being able to create an FSA ID. Okay, let's talk a little bit about students or parents not working or not filing tax returns. If a parent or student or a contributor did not work, they should still report any income that they did earn, which may be zero. Other benefits or untaxed income may still need to be reported on the FAFSA. So make sure, like Mandy said, that you read everything on the FAFSA and maybe reread it again if you are confused. If a student or parent or spouse contributor did not file a tax return, you want to look at a couple of things. First, you want to look at, were they required to file or were they not required to file? So let's say you have a student who worked a very part-time job over the summer and maybe made only $400. They would be under the tax filing threshold and they would report just their income and that they were not required to file. And again, you want to report any earned or untaxed income on the FAFSA. If a contributor was required to file, they cannot complete the FAFSA until that filing is done. So if you're working with a family who says, and I have had this, who says, I haven't filed tax returns in several years, they must do that before they can complete the FAFSA and before they can receive federal financial aid. Okay, this is something that's really exciting for WASFA. We have college access support representatives across the state of Wisconsin. So if you already are working with a contact or financial aid office, that's awesome. Keep talking to them. Reach out to those people in your favorite financial aid office if you have questions or need support. If you don't already have a contact, that's absolutely okay, because we've created a list of WASFA members based on regions to make sure that you always have a financial aid administrator to contact, and you can email them when you need support. You can follow this link to find your WASFA CISA rep. And then Mandy and I and WASFA just really wanted to thank you for watching this series. We really appreciate you taking the time to work with students across the state of Wisconsin. If you are interested in watching more of the series, please feel free to follow this link and watch us on YouTube. Thank you so much.